Lisa eyed the man in the red MAGA hat, whispering to her friend, "How can anyone wear that here?" But when she complained to the manager, he dropped a bombshell. "He owns the mall." Shocked, she realized he'd overheard, and he wasn't done yet. What happened next? Lisa stood in line at the cashier, balancing her shopping bags and mentally ticking off her list of errands. The mall was packed, as usual, and she was ready to head home. But then, as she shifted her gaze across the store, her eyes landed on a man wearing a bright red MAGA hat. The sight of it immediately caught her attention. It wasn't unusual to see those hats in public. It seemed like they were everywhere these days. But something about this man stood out. He was older than most people she saw wearing the hat, maybe in his late 50s or early 60s, and his gray suit clashed with the casual, almost defiant nature of the hat. The suit looked expensive, tailored even, but the hat seemed out of place. It was like watching someone wear a tuxedo with a baseball cap, something that didn't quite fit together. As he walked past her, the conflicting combination made her pause, and she couldn't suppress a wave of irritation. She knew what that hat represented. It symbolized everything she was trying to distance herself from in this world: division, nationalism, and a kind of defiance that always made her feel uncomfortable. It was a constant reminder of political battles, of the kind of rhetoric she couldn't stand. She was a liberal, socially conscious, and she'd always been outspoken about standing up for what she believed in. And yet, in the moment, there she was, standing in line with this overwhelming sense of disdain. She tried to push it out of her mind. After all, it wasn't her place to judge people by what they wore. But the irritation lingered. The man had a certain air of entitlement about him. She watched as he moved toward the exit, and as she shifted her weight from one foot to the other, she muttered under her breath, "Ugh, another one." She knew it was wrong to assume anything about him, but in that brief moment she couldn't help herself. Meanwhile, the man in the MAGA hat, who had been casually browsing the shelves nearby, overheard Lisa's comment. His eyes narrowed slightly, his hand pausing on a display item. He didn't turn completely, but his posture stiffened for a moment, as if weighing something in his mind. Lisa, however, was too caught up in her own frustration to notice the subtle shift. She was ranting, barely able to control her irritation at the sight of him. "How could anyone wear that in public?" she muttered under her breath to her friend, oblivious to the fact that her words were being heard by the very person she was criticizing. The man's expression remained impassive. He didn't flinch, didn't let the remark stir him. His eyes, though, remained focused on the items before him, scanning the shelves with methodical precision, as though nothing had happened. There was no sign of anger or frustration on his face, just a quiet calm that almost seemed too deliberate. He looked like a man who had seen it all before, a man who had learned to ignore the small disruptions in his world. What Lisa didn't know was that the man, though a stranger to her, was the owner of the mall. This bustling, upscale shopping center, filled with the latest trends and the occasional political statement, was his investment, his pride. He owned every inch of the space, from the polished floors to the carefully curated stores, the food court, the high-end brands, the quirky boutiques. All of it was part of his vision. But what did it mean that he, the very person she was silently judging, was in the store she was shopping in? Was he just another shopper in her eyes? Or was there something more to him that she couldn't yet understand? The irony of it all hung in the air, unnoticed by Lisa as she continued her rant. A few minutes later, as Lisa walked toward the mall exit, her mind still running over what had just happened, she spotted him again. The man in the MAGA hat was standing directly in front of her, blocking her path with surprising precision. She halted abruptly, her steps faltering as she almost collided with him. Her first instinct was to look for a way around him, to sidestep any potential confrontation and get out of the situation as quickly as possible. But he wasn't making it easy. He simply stood there, smiling politely. Lisa's heart skipped a beat as she realized he had positioned himself deliberately. The man's presence was no longer just an inconvenience. It was now a challenge. "I couldn't help but overhear your thoughts on me," he said, his tone calm, almost disarmingly so. There was no aggression in his voice, no immediate signs of anger or annoyance. Instead, there was a controlled curiosity. "I'm curious. What exactly makes you think I don't belong here?" Lisa's breath caught in her throat. She blinked, caught off guard by his directness. She had never expected him to approach her, let alone speak to her in such a composed manner. His words hung in the air, forcing her to confront her own feelings. She hadn't thought much about her earlier comment, just a brief moment of frustration. But now that he was standing there, addressing her, the whole situation suddenly felt much more significant than it had moments before. For a few seconds, Lisa was speechless, her mind scrambling to find a response. Was he mocking her? Was he genuinely curious? Her instinct was to dismiss him, to say something sharp and walk away. But something about the way he stood there, unmoving and calm, made her hesitate. She had no idea how much this encounter would change everything. Lisa's mind raced as the man's words hung in the air. "It's mine." The mall? Her thoughts scrambled to make sense of what he was saying. She tried to process it, but it didn't make sense at first. She looked at him again, trying to read his expression. There was something calm, almost amused in his demeanor. Then it hit her. He owned the mall. The realization hit her like a punch to the stomach. Her eyes widened in disbelief, and she blinked several times, hoping she had misunderstood. But his steady gaze confirmed it. You own this place?" Lisa asked, her voice tinged with disbelief and shock. The words felt foreign coming out of her mouth, like she couldn't quite accept the idea. The man nodded slowly, as if waiting for her to process it. "Yes," he said, his tone still calm. "I'm the one who built it, and I'm the one who keeps it running." There was no hint of arrogance in his voice, just a simple statement of fact. "It's funny, isn't it?" he continued. "How we can look at someone and assume things based on their appearance or their choices, but we don't always know the full story." His words were measured, almost philosophical, as if he had seen this kind of misunderstanding play out before. Lisa felt the heat rising in her cheeks as her face flushed with embarrassment. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. She had been so quick to judge, to make assumptions based on the man's hat and his appearance, not once considering that there was more to him than met the eye. Now, standing in front of him, she had no idea what to say. She had never expected this kind of encounter, and she realized, too late, how wrong she had been.